I like to see what I'm getting into. Looking good, looking good. First, I want to just say that I think the Bay District schools have some very talented and heroic teachers. I know that I have been very hard on the schools, but I didn't mean to be hard on the schools so much as certain leadership who has failed you and failed this community. And I also want to say thank you to Sean DePalma for getting us Toilets for Pride. That is a huge get for us today, and we are, save the date, June 10th, and we will have Pride. And I want to thank you all for coming this afternoon, and welcome again to Out in the South. I'm Cindy Wilker, and I was the founder of the LGBTQ Center in Bay County, the first inclusive, dedicated, safe space for LGBTQ people in Bay County. Come, whoever you are. You are welcome here. No matter your age, your size, the color of your eyes, your skin, your hair, you are welcome here. No matter how you came here, if you came alone or with others, you are welcome here. No matter whom you love or how you speak or whatever your abilities, you are welcome here. Whether you come with laughter in your heart or tears in your eyes, you are welcome here. And if you come here with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands, then you are indeed welcome here. That poem was written by Melanie Morell Ensminger. She's a Unitarian Universalist. UUs are alive and well in Bay County and have been a huge supporter of mine and the centers. Yes. And a few of them are here today, including my social justice guru and one of my personal heroes, Mr. Bob Gilmore. Thank you, UUs. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the passing of one of the gay community's biggest allies, Susie Sizemore.
Yes.
Susie was a soldier in the Army for Social Justice, a dedicated UU, and a staunch advocate for transgender health care in Panama City. Many of you may remember her as a midwife and a colleague of Dr. Mike Ingram. Susie and I met at a sit-in in Neil Dunn's office in Tallahassee, and she will be missed, and memories of her will be a blessing. I'm very proud of our work here with Out in the South. This is indeed a success story. This is what a seat at the table looks like. Out in the South was the brainchild of Dean Clark. Dr. Clark envisioned an event that would grow year over year and become an annual event at FSUPC, and Dr. Clark recognized this tremendous opportunity to educate and raise awareness about issues facing diverse and marginalized communities. And we are very thankful that Dr. Clark's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee chose to focus on LGBTQ community for the inaugural Out in the South conference. But then hurricanes, pandemics, what could go wrong? Shepherding in the center through the aftermath of Hurricane Michael, closely followed by 2 years of COVID restrictions, and the general toxicity of LGBTQ issues in the panhandle of Florida made it difficult to build, to launch, and to successfully fund the operating of the center. It was a huge undertaking. None of this could have been possible without my partner of 23 years, Arlene Garner. Nothing is impossible with Arlene in my corner. And I had been warned that in Bay County it would be impossible to build programs like Out in the South. We would never be able to partner with institutions like FSUPC, foundations like St. Joe, or nonprofits like the United Way. That would be nothing but wishful thinking. Ha! Because of Dr. Clark's commitment to DE&I, here we are at the table, not just being talked about, being talked with. Yep. This event Out in the South changed the trajectory of the center and definitely put a spotlight on the conversation around gay issues in Bay County. The result of the center's inclusion was the hefty infusion of about $250,000 directly into the local economy in the form of food, housing, and transportation from grants and programs that were administered during the last year of my presidency. This is diversity, equity, and inclusion in action. Thank you, Dr. Clark. After the judge, I am an avowed atheist. general election in 2016, I joined the UU. It was a desperate move, remove head from oven. This is where I met Susie Sizemore and Kathy Reifenberg. Kathy was the founder of Panama City PFLAG and a committed ally. She realized something had to be done about the dismal treatment of LGBTQ youth in the Bay District schools. I too was a kid who attempted suicide. How could this still be happening, and how do we stop it? I had no idea what to do. Kathy suggested we call Nadine Smith, and she arranged an introduction at a local Starbucks. And my goal at that time, meeting Nadine Smith, who I didn't know from a bag of chips, was to get a human rights ordinance passed in Bay County. Well, Nadine Smith knew we would fail, and told me so. Well, it seemed like every door was shut then. And she gave me some horrible marching orders. She advised that I would actually have to meet and talk with people about being an old lesbian, about being a kid lesbian, about gay stuff. I'd have to form alliances. I would have to form partnerships. I would have to build community yuck, all that stuff absolutely terrified me. Standing in front of a room full of people, outing yourself over and over and over, and reliving some of the most traumatic events in your life is not a day at the beach, but it helps people to understand. I kept knocking and banging and pressing my nose up against the window of resistance, and eventually each one of those failures was a success. Could it be that this Nadine Smith knew what she was talking about? It was as though hinges were being hung on the heavy doors of exclusion. Every time we gave a presentation to a community group or held an event in our community, the heavy doors opened a bit easier. Each time we went through a new door, it opened a bit more. More and more hinges were needed. And we had many failures and some bitter disappointments. And our only goal at that time was to fail forward. And Nadine Smith said, I like that, because you're going to fail. But you're going to fail forward. That's a big thing. It wasn't real ambitious, but it was effective. Our only goal was to try and not fall back. Eventually, the doors began to open. FSU PCs out in the South as a result of 5 years of failing forward. When Hurricane Michael destroyed the center, I had no idea what to do. Nadine Smith called me this time. Equality Florida provided funding to rebuild and save the center. And after we rebuilt and reopened, COVID arrived. And I had no idea what to do. Nadine Smith provided guidance, leadership, and a team of people at Equality Florida to help us get through. Big hinges like John Harris Maurer and Dee Palazzo. Big hinges like Renee Cantu, Esme Rodriguez, and Brandon Wolf, and many others that comprise a team at Equality Florida that we could not have done without. We have 3 or 4 or 5, or a lot of Equality Florida folks here today, and that is awesome. It's great to see you. And thank you, Stephanie, for all the work you're doing. So who is this Nadine Smith, and why should I be listening to her? Well, when you meet her, you know she's wired for activism. Her grandparents were part of the first integrated farming cooperative in Mississippi. Her grandfather was an organizer, and he organized sharecroppers to stand up against racism. And many of you know of her father, Smitty, a longtime local politician and public servant. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that the measure of a woman is not where she stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where she stands in times of challenge and controversy. Nadine's true character has been revealed many times over the past 30 years, revealed at times of chaos and not comfort. 30 years? I had no idea that. Well, you're not that you're old. I'm just saying that you had that birthday. I had no idea. Nadine has worked tirelessly, diligently, to close the door on bigotry, to close the door on racism, to close the door on gun violence, and to nail shut the door on anti-LGBTQ plus legislation for good. Each one of us needs to commit to be a hinge on the door for justice. Be a hinge on the door for equality and be a hinge on the door for freedom. Together with Nadine's leadership, I believe we can swing those doors wide open. Get involved. And now, who you've all been waiting for, please welcome a personal hero of mine and one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the entire world, the person most likely to blow the hinges off, Nadine Smith.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's the only time I ever wore tux. What was my intro music? I didn't get to hear much of it. What was it? All right, we'll bring it back at the end when I do the dance segment. So, I'm going to confess something to you. I have spoken on many stages. I'm always nervous when I come back to my hometown. In fact, I saw somebody posted, if you think therapy's working, go home for a weekend. And it's sort of, I'm returning to the scene of the crime in some ways. A lot of those traumas that we talk about. I went to Millville Elementary, I went to Callaway, I went to Everett, I went to Rutherford, I played softball at Gulf Coast. Wow. Yeah, so, I'm from here for real. In fact, I remember there was a softball practice, and the coach yelled, "Who's been gay?" And we were running out to the field, and half the team stopped, and I thought, we slowly turned around and realized he was asking who had left Ben Gay in the dugout. Oh. Anyway, but when I would speak at places, I used to tell the story about my first coming out experience. So I was in 3rd grade, and that was the first time I had a girlfriend, and I knew that I had a girlfriend because she told me she was my girlfriend, which that was fine, but she went and told our teacher that we were going to get married. And this was my favorite teacher. It was a teacher, when you mess up and you accidentally say mom to your teacher, she was that teacher for me. And I remember she told us to stay in the classroom right before lunch. And how the class goes, woo, because they can tell you're about to be in trouble. The class made that noise, and I'm quite nervous. And I used to say the name of my girlfriend, and then one day somebody said, "Can you spell her last name?" Because her last name was a bit unusual. And I started to, but it was the first time I'd ever heard of Google, and I thought, I'm going to change her name because I don't want to find out that she's, campaign manager for some terrible candidate or dead or something horrible. And I said, she's kind of preserved in amber in my memory, and so I started to call her Amber. Anyway, so there she was. She told our teacher, brought us to the front of the room, and she said, very, very seriously, you can't get married. Girls have to marry boys. Boys have to marry girls. I was devastated. I actually thought she meant that if I didn't select one would be assigned to me. And I remember that Amber and I sat under our favorite tree, and I remember she was crying, and I was furious. And I did not know what gaydar was, but in retrospect, I know that I had it because I walked up to this boy in our class, who I'll call Alan, and he was the gayest little boy. And I said, "Alan, this is what's going to happen. You and I are going to get married. You're changing your last name to Smith. And Amber is going to live with us after her husband is killed in the war." So, not that we're at war, but the beginnings of the plan. I was willing to fail forward in my plan. So I told that story one time, and afterwards, this woman came up to me, and she's very intense. She reaches out and she just grabs my shoulders. With tears in her eyes, she said, "I am so sorry that happened to you." And I thought, take it down a notch. It's okay. I'm fine. She said, "That never should have happened. You should have been born into a world where that was not possible." And each word she's saying, I find myself getting both a little more emotional and a little more annoyed. She couldn't let go. She said, "I need you to know that never should have happened to you. Suddenly I'm crying, and she's crying. And I realized that one of my coping mechanisms was to tell that story with a punchline. Because it was really devastating to me to have my favorite teacher tell me that I shouldn't exist. It was the first time I got that message delivered so clearly. And so I was a kid that hid. Hard to do when you're an athlete, for example, but not only did I hide, I understand the people who make anti-LGBTQ jokes and then surprised they get caught in a scandal, because I understand that defense mechanism. So years later, I was at an event, it was mostly older men, and I said, I had taken myself through this exercise of actually imagining the world that she described to me, a world where at no point in time, there was no concept of coming out of the closet, because at no point in time would the closet be built around me, a world in which I was allowed not only to exist, but treated with respect and dignity. And so I said, everybody, close your eyes. I want you to just imagine, from the day you're born, the first time you go to school, there's not assumptions about your gender, your sexual orientation. There are books in the library reflect the whole range, and you can recognize yourself. That you move through life never having to come out, never feeling shamed, isolated, rejected. So we did this little exercise, and at the end of it, up front there were 4 guys at one table. One of them was crying. At this table, one of the guys, I could see tears. And I thought, they probably envisioned something so beautiful, something so magical. I said, would either of you be willing to tell what you saw in that visioning exercise? And one guy stood up, he said, nothing. I couldn't even imagine it. Can't imagine what that world would have been like. And I thought, okay, that's a bit awkward. How about you, sir? He said exactly the same. I literally cannot imagine what that world would be like. And that struck me as one of the greatest challenges that we face, because it is hard to build a future if you can't imagine what that possibility could be. And so a lot of the work at Equality Florida has been getting people to take the time to imagine what it would be like to head towards your retirement without even for a moment wondering if the facility you are considering moving to for better care is welcoming or not welcoming. What it would be like to never have to wonder if when you go to the doctor and you say, yes, I am quite certain I'm not pregnant, it is not shocking to them that you can, that you're not on birth control like that. So, all of these things, all of the things that get in the way, that tell you that you are not quite welcome here, if none of those things existed. And so we have the Safe and Healthy Schools program, and we moved it from the idea of schools, of addressing schools simply as a place where we should stop the bullying. That is the lowest possible bar. We said, what will schools be like when they are places that embrace and create an atmosphere where every student can thrive? And we began to work that problem backwards. We began to train tens of thousands of school personnel, from principals, superintendents, to bus drivers and cafeteria workers. Because all of those folks come into contact with students and are able to signal to young people whether they are welcomed and invited and embraced, or shunned and ostracized. We began a health equity program for all of the reasons you heard about, because we know that if you don't get access to health care because you don't think you're going to be treated respectfully, the chances of you living a long and healthy life diminish. And we see diminished lifespans because of stressors and because the healthcare system does not embrace it. So here we are. I'm 57. I'll just out myself. I'm 57 years old. I know, I looked at it, I know. You can say so. But it means I've been through a few things. I've seen some of these battles before. And now as we stand here at a time when we are seeing increased hostility, we are seeing more hate crimes, we're seeing more bullying, we're seeing rhetoric from the top down influencing what happens in our classrooms and in our communities. It's important to remember that we've been here before. The year I was born, the Johns Committee was going through the schools throughout Florida, purging civil rights advocates and anyone they labeled a homosexual. When I was in school, Anita Bryant went from being a spokesmodel for orange juice to being the face of a campaign that began in Florida, but went all the way across the nation, and in its wake, bans on gay people being married, bans on our ability to adopt, and a rhetoric about who we were that described us as pedophiles, that said our presence in the life of children was dangerous. And it took years for us to push back on that. In fact, in the early days of Equality Florida, when we had youth groups, they were always run by a heterosexual married couple, precisely because that stigma ran so deep. And so now we see it coming around again, using this same rhetoric, and it is always coupled with racism. Anita Bryant was funded by the moral majority at a time that abortion wasn't their biggest issue. They were furious that the Supreme Court had passed a law integrating schools. That was their number one issue. And now we see the same kinds of attacks occurring, not just in Florida, but most visibly in Florida. And so I'm so glad that the conversation about intersectionality came up, because these things are tied at a very fundamental level in America. You can't talk about American history without talking about the land being taken from indigenous people. You can't talk about the wealth of America without talking about that wealth built on enslaving Africans and the descendants of those enslaved Africans. And so our origin story is rooted in a pecking order, in a hierarchy, in the justification of treating some people as less than. And that structure permeated everything: our educational system, our religious institutions in this country, our government, where my ancestors were called 3/5 of a human. So we have to understand that history, not to run away from it, but to build the future that we want, to engage in that exercise where we can actually envision a future that moves us forward. It means we have to confront these things. We have to say, how do we put down that legacy? How do we change America? Not by running away and hiding from our past, but acknowledging it and acknowledging how it reverberates now. So I remember the moment I realized that Donald Trump would become the president. It was May 16th, 2024 at 9:45 a.m. And I was in a hotel ballroom in Miami. I was part of something called Leadership Florida. And it was the last day, and they had invited a demographer from the University of North Carolina, and he was going to come and speak to us about some demographic trends and marketing, and I thought, I'm going to play Words with Friends and lay back and try not to fall asleep. But then he stepped up to the microphone and he said, America is about to experience a demographic convulsion that is going to change everything economically, socially, and politically. He said it is the collision of these two demographic realities, the graying of America and the browning of America. And by that he meant the older generation, because of healthcare inequities and various things, was overwhelmingly white. And the emerging population was much more diverse, and in fact, no racialized group would be in the majority. He said, so you have economic and political power by a shrinking older group that is fearful of this demographic shift. They cannot imagine a future for America which does not look like the world they grew up in. And what they are actually signaling is a deep-seated existential fear that becoming a minority in America means being treated as minorities have typically been treated in America. And he said, and so that is why there are messages resonating with people in ways that are surprising us right now. Donald Trump is speaking to people who look at that future, that multiracial future, that future where LGBTQ kids do not have to hide or lie to survive. That diverse America, and they are terrified by it. We look at it and we say, finally, we get to exhale. Finally, we get to exist. Finally, we can move through the world without apologizing for our existence. We can move past a world that says, you do not get to exist, and if you exist, you better hide. And if you do not hide successfully enough, any violence, any harm that comes to you is your own fault. We saw a world that we could move past. They saw a world that was terrifying to them because it didn't look like an America where X marks the spot for them. So what do we do when the vision, the very idea of the America that we believe must exist for all of us, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of where you grew up, what zip code, what state, that you have to have a stake in that future, that you have to be able to see a future where you, if you're a parent, where your kids can thrive. And they see those same things and think, this is a future that is alien, that is scary, that is hostile to them. When we talk about, let us look honestly at our past, it's not simply to say, because I want you to feel terrible about yourself. There's a push in Florida schools to teach that George Washington was against slavery. You can say that George Washington was a brilliant military strategist. You can say that George Washington paved the way for the peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next until recently. What you can't say is anything other than the fact that George Washington was a brutal slave owner. His teeth were not made of wood. They were made of the teeth of enslaved Africans, removed for his convenience and vanity. But why does it matter that we just tell the truth, that we can hold both of these things? We can hold up the Constitution as a promissory note that we are going to fulfill beyond the flaws of the people that wrote it and find common cause in that. Why do we have to say, why do we have to erase history and pretend those things aren't true? It doesn't work that way. It won't work that way. You have to create a fiction in order to pursue a future based on those lies. So we are at this tipping point moment where the majority in a generation that has outsized power right now is cramped by fear, and in that fear lashes out on our existence. And then there's us, knocking on those doors, saying that we have a right to be here, not to be tolerated, but included, that we have a right to belong, that our voices matter. And that is our challenge right now, because many of those people aren't long-distant, historical figures. They're our family members. They're people that we love, who are holding on to some very dangerous ideas. And so we have two challenges that I will leave you with and throw it open for some questions. We have to learn from history. I talked about the Johns Committee and I talked about Anita Bryant, but we could have predicted January 6th by paying attention to history. Because after Reconstruction, what did we see? We saw violence in capitals based on the outcome of elections. In Wilmington, North Carolina, we saw, after an election that produced a multiracial city council, the White Citizens Brigade laid waste to that city. They literally said, we will leave the river running thick with the blood of blacks. and they did that. And it would be 75 years before another black person ever ran for office in Wilmington, North Carolina. We saw it in New Orleans, where the police battled white militias when both the Democrat and the Republican governor claimed victory in the election. No one was ever punished for those insurrections, but it shaped the politics of those states and the entire South. And so we are in this inflection point in our country. And it feels very dangerous, because it is. But it's in these dangerous moments that we have to have those hard conversations. And I know social media tells us just to divide into our algorithm, listen only to the people who already agree, reject and caricature the people you don't agree with. But social cohesion and the erosion of those bonds, believe me, I have so many debates with my Rutherford classmates online, because there are ties that bind us. We do remember things. We can't completely dehumanize each other. And some of those conversations have changed how I speak about things. Some of those conversations have changed how they think about things. But as people doing this work, not in the bluest state, or the bluest city, in the bluest state, the burden is higher for us. We do have to engage. We do have to find common humanity. We do have to name and address those fears. And finally, through that, somehow, we have to be able to go through the exercise of envisioning a city, a county, a state, a country, and a world that the next child born deserves to be born into. Thank you. So now that I've said that, it's going to be awkward if nobody has a question. So there's got to be at least 3 questions, or nobody gets to leave. So
I don't need a microphone, Rainey. Thank you.
You got it.
My question for you is, and it's for everyone in here. I think we've all experienced hate from our own community, not just outside. So what would be your advice for us that are experiencing hate within our own community, and not just those that don't necessarily live like-minded?
Well, you know, around racism, sometimes there's expression, not all skin folks are kin folks. But it's also true around LGBT issues. Equality Florida, when we spoke out against the murder of Trayvon Martin, there were folks who said, hey, Equality Florida, stay in your lane, don't speak up on these things, or even said, this has become just whatever issues Nadine cares about. And so our board made a point of saying, we're going to issue a statement to make it crystal clear that we understand the intersection between racism, homophobia, transphobia, all of these things. And we're going to make it clear to people that if you didn't realize it before, shame on us, realize it now, we are going to show up in those spaces. We are seeing this anti-trans sentiment being lifted up within LGBT circles right now. And it is absolutely incumbent upon us to challenge it. I will tell people very clearly, if you do not understand that there can be no division, no silencing, and no gap between where we stand around trans issues, then Equality Florida is not your organization, because we are going to show up. We have a program called Transaction Florida, and it is a program designed not only to organize within the trans community, but to make sure that there's accountability to Equality Florida on how we show up around trans issues across the spectrum of things, whether it's safe schools, our healthcare work, our business outreach. So I think that we just have to continue to do that work, to do that educating, and to make sure that it doesn't matter if it's a donor, a volunteer, somebody in the community. If you don't understand where we are, shame on us, we're going to amplify our voice around those issues. All right, that's one.
I just
Yes.
have a comment. This
Do you
is a
wanna-
good president. This is a good president on top of